I might just mention the story that one of the stories that I wrote about, just because I think it was really notable news that Rocket Lawyer, which is a platform that provides legal forms and legal services to individuals and consumers, raised $223 million, which is a lot of money by any measure. And given it's been around since 2008, but given its prior raises were all a couple of $1 million here and there along the way, it's never really raised a substantial amount of money. And I think clearly this is a sign of we talk so much about alternative methods of delivering legal services, but I think this just underscores how many people are turning to this kind of a company, LegalZoom, Rocket Lawyer, that sort of thing, for legal help. I think a lot of people forget that Rocket Lawyer actually provides lawyers, not just forms. You can get help from a lawyer through Rocket Lawyer, but it's a huge boost, and clearly their business has soared even higher because of the pandemic over the past year, and because of people needing to obtain legal help in ways that don't require them to leave their homes. But it was already really taking off. I think he said, what do they have, 35 million or something, 25 million, 35 million registered users in the United States. And they have a huge audience in other parts of the world. They have a big presence in the UK. I talked to Charlie Moore, the CEO, last night, who was telling me that I think in France, something like a quarter of all consumers in France have an account with Rocket Lawyer through their workplaces. Their employers are providing them, and that's happening more and more in the United States as well. Rocket Lawyer was one of the first to kind of partner with, when the UK set up its they didn't call it Alternative Legal Services Board, whatever they called it. Rocket Lawyer was one of the first to become an authorized provider under that. Now it's participating in the sandbox in Utah, providing legal help through that Utah sandbox. So I think it's a real sign of the times. And again, it's also notable that Charlie Moore is a Black legal tech founder in a field that remains notorious for having a very small number of people of color as founders in the legal tech industry. So congratulations to them for doing that.
Well, I thought it was super interesting because Charlie Moore is great. He's a great guy. He's so unassuming in some ways. And I think that that's partly why I feel like Rocket Lawyer just is under the radar sometimes. LegalZoom gets so much attention, and Rocket Lawyer is doing the hard work, a little bit under the radar, succeeding, doing a lot of really interesting, important things. And you just don't hear quite as much about him. So I was really happy to see that you covered it, and I saw it elsewhere as well, and some major legal tech publications as well, not just tech publications, not just legal tech. So I was super happy to hear it. But I just think it's interesting how sometimes there's a lot of hoopla about some companies, and others, for some reason, just there isn't as much hoopla about them, but they're behind the scenes really innovating and doing a lot of really interesting things. And I feel like Charlie's one of those, heads up one of those kinds of companies. He's really done a lot of great things over the years, and I was super happy to see that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I always kind of wonder, like, do more people, like, outside of like legal tech and the legal field, do they know of LegalZoom because of those commercials, and that kind of brings brand awareness? But like what we've seen with kind of like COVID-19 and the money that they're raising, and that Rocket Lawyer is one of the first, or at least publicly, to say like they were going to take part in the Utah sandbox. They really are exploring like those different avenues that you can provide like legal services. And especially, like I've heard with some people, you don't maybe want to tackle the consumer side because it's kind of like consumers don't have a ton of like legal needs necessarily. They don't have legal budgets like corporations, but it's kind of like he's showing that there is a market for that. You can still and not necessarily target like a big law or corporate legal departments.
Yeah.
And
And
kind of
I'm wondering, I feel like unassuming wasn't the right word. He has a very commanding presence when you meet him. I don't mean that, he's just not, there's a better word for it, but
Well, one thing is he's not pretentious is one thing. I guess
right. I think
some
that's, or
CEOs you
something
met are
like
just
that.
have a lot
Yeah,
of swagger and pretension around them, and he's just a nice guy. He's just a really nice guy.
exactly.
You
Yeah.
know, a former, also a former, not only a lawyer but a former naval officer during the Gulf War. Very accomplished guy, and so.
I
yeah,
just wanted
kind
to,
of
I think pretentious is not pretentious is a much better, unassuming, I don't think was the best adjective. So I just wanted to come up with a better one that more clarified what I meant.
Yeah, spinning off Victoria's point too, just thinking about it from the funder's standpoint, I think it's a really smart bet on somebody like Rocket Lawyer for the COVID reasons, but also we've mentioned Utah a few times in regulatory sandboxes. We've talked about that here in the past, how that's probably only going to increase moving forward. And if you have somebody like Rocket Lawyer who's been through that in the UK, been through that at Utah, knows kind of the regulatory hoops that you need to jump through, that when it does open up to say a California, New York, which is being talked about right now, they're probably going to have the jump on a lot of other companies that may not know how to jump through those hoops in the way that Rocket Lawyer does. So if you're looking for a company to bet on from a funding standpoint, it makes sense that they have a very high market cap moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're hardly even a bet at this point. I mean, you know, they're a well-established company with a good, solid customer base. I mean, this is a real sort of a, you know, I think they characterized it even as a growth equity investment. And, you know, we're probably going to be, this is another one that we're probably going to be seeing, looking at an IPO not too much farther down the road, just because it seems to be a natural next step, especially after an investment like this. Any other thoughts on that?
I definitely agree that like, yeah, like they've been more low key than like LegalZoom or like one of those. And maybe that was by design. I mean, you know, what's the company that everybody demonizes when they talk about this kind of stuff? It's LegalZoom, right? It's like, oh, you don't want to be like LegalZoom. We don't want to be like LegalZoom and blah blah. Well, you know, maybe Rocket Lawyer avoided that by not being the tall poppy in that situation. You know.
That's a really
Well,
good
yeah.
point too.
Yeah, and actually, Charlie, I mean, there's something else that Charlie said to me when we talked yesterday is that, and he was also on my podcast not long ago. If anybody wants to go back and listen to this, we had a much longer conversation. But he said that their approach has not been to be sort of confront the legal system and try and take it on. It's been to try and partner with some of the established legal system. I mean, they famously had a partnership with the ABA a few years ago. That I don't know exactly what happened to that. Victor, you may know. I mean, it kind of fizzled out, but they were partnering with the ABA.
We have a lot of partnerships. I mean,
yeah, right. I mean, they've partnered with these, you know, with Utah. They're talking to Arizona about doing something there. I mean, they've been trying to work with the bars, not against them, and work with some of the established providers. So whether that's good or bad, I don't know.